Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Dina Kniess, and I'll be talking about trustworthiness in qualitative research. To begin talking about trustworthiness, we have a few learning objectives. One of this is really to define trustworthiness in qualitative research, looking at identifying the three characteristics of trustworthiness in qualitative research, and also identify techniques for increasing trustworthiness in qualitative research. Trustworthiness in qualitative research really looks at the rigor in qualitative research studies. So when you're looking at a study, you want to make sure it's rigorous in terms of the qualitative research. Trustworthiness is different than validity and reliability in quantitative research. And we'll talk about this a little bit. With validity and reliability, you're really looking at, does the procedures lead to the same outcome as you're going through the research? And for qualitative research, that's really achieved through a number of means. It's also looking at the researcher's ethical standards. And this does not just mean in terms of doing no harm and making sure you follow the Institutional Review Board protocols. It's looking at what standards did you use in conducting this study, and how are you coming to this topic? Basically, what is your positionality? What characteristics have shaped how you've come to this topic for your research study? So for trustworthiness in qualitative research, one of the first items is, does it make sense? So when you're thinking about this, one of the graphics I used on the left is, as you're reading it, does it look right? Is everything seeming coherent? Is it sounding right as you think about it? And overall, just does this make sense with the type of data collected? And this is one quote that I liked in Miriam and Tisdale's Qualitative Research, A Guide to Design and Implementation. It's the 4th edition. And it talks about quantitative studies really need to convince readers and their audience that procedures have been followed faithfully, and qualitative study provides the reader with a depiction that is rich enough in detail to see that the author's conclusion makes sense. There are 3 key terms in terms of trustworthiness, and that's credibility, transferability, and dependability. We're going to start with credibility in qualitative research. And credibility really relates to the internal validity of the qualitative study. And basically it means, in terms of all the documents that you have collected and how you've gone about collecting them, whether they're interviews, focus groups, observational data, if they're looking at hashtags, if you're looking at online media, how does that relate to the internal validity of the study? And I look at this question from Lincoln and Guba, which really looks at, with the data presented, are the findings credible? So the first one is looking at triangulation, looking at the one, and you can achieve triangulation through having multiple investigators or co-researchers with you to study the topic. Have you used multiple methods, whether it's looking at document analysis, looking at documents that relate to your study, focus group transcripts, interview transcripts? How many methods did you use to answer your research question? The next one is member checks. And member checks go beyond just sending your transcript to individuals in order to have them check and see if the transcript is accurate in terms of what they told you on that day. It really looks at providing your participants with an ability to respond in terms of, these are the themes and these are the meaning making I have. Does this sound like what you told me in the interview or the focus group in terms of the data? The last one is the researcher's ethics. And this really relates to, how am I described in my study when I talk about what I'm doing? How have I gone about describing my positionality in terms of making sure I'm credible in terms of coming to this topic? But it's also really looking at, How have you responded to ethical dilemmas or situations that have come up in the field? For example, what happens if confidentiality may be breached? Or what happens if the description is too much that it would reveal the site where it had taken place? The next item in trustworthiness is dependability, and this is basically related to the reliability or consistency of the data. In quantitative research, it is the extent to which the studies can be replicated and the procedures followed in the exact same conditions, and another researcher could achieve the same results. In qualitative research, it's the extent to which the results are consistent with the data collected. So for the interviews and the focus groups and everything, are the results consistent with that? There are a couple strategies to increase dependability. The first one relates back to credibility, and that is looking at triangulation with multiple methods, looking at the investigator's positionality as they come to the topic, and also looking at peer examination. Peer examination can include looking at multiple researchers or having somebody else review your findings. The fourth one here is looking at an audit trail, and an audit trail is basically a researcher journal. The audit trail really looks at, one, are you documenting what you're doing in the field and making enough, meaning not only of the data, it doesn't need to be as you're collecting it, but have you described in enough detail if there has needed to be any deviations from the data you collected? The audit trail includes memoing as well, and Johnny Saldana has a text called the Coding Manual for Qualitative Research, and what it really looks at is looking at how do you create memos based on what you're finding within your themes related to your research questions, and these memos can in turn be analyzed. The final item is looking at transferability or external validity in terms of your study. So when you're thinking about your study and the external audiences for it, really try and think of what context would this apply. For example, can the findings apply to other situations? If you're researching in a school district for urban school teachers, would their same experiences apply to teachers in suburban or even rural school districts? The other item to think about is really, are there enough rich, thick descriptions of the settings and the participants to get a sense that it would transfer to other contexts? Meaning, have you described what setting, like what is the site, what are the details? If it's ethnography, there's prolonged experience and time in the field. Have you described the setting under which this study was conducted, the time frame? Have you also described whether, if you're looking at higher education, is a public or private institution? Have you described the setting if you're trying to examine, looking at patients who are older, like how do they, if they're in a nursing home, how do they find fulfillment? Have you described the setting in enough detail with all of the actors that cases can be applied from one situation to another? The last one really looks at maximum variation sampling. Like, is there enough variation in the cases or participants to really look at, is there a diverse enough sample for which that there can can individuals make generalizations? For example, participants, we talked a little bit before, I gave an example of cases, but for participants, if you're looking at a study of, for example, depression in older adults, have you looked at it across age? Have you looked at it across socioeconomic status? Have you looked at it in terms of where individuals are located? These are things that when you're thinking of your audiences and who you would like to use the data, that you need to think about. Thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope the information will help you as you're getting ready to think about ethics and also thinking about how to increase the trustworthiness for your proposed qualitative study. And also thinking about that in terms of data analysis. If you have any questions, I can be reached at dkniess, DKNIESS at westga.edu. And also, good luck with the rest of your qualitative study proposal.